Self-sabotage can be a pretty icky word, but truth is, most of us who are experiencing some type of downfall or holdback or experience that we're not looking for in our life, in our relationship, in our work, are to some degree experiencing a level of self-sabotage. So in order to get through that, though, sometimes we need help, and we really need help in better understanding what it actually is and where it's coming from. So where do we even start with that? How do you get the point across that self-sabotage is something, in fact, that we do need to work through?
That is the conundrum, as we say, right? So absolutely. Just kind of give it a little framework. So self-sabotage for me is essentially anytime when we cut ourselves down before anyone else can. And so that looks like, whether that can manifest into procrastination, substance abuse, negative self-talk, remaining in that comfort zone that doesn't lead to growth, as well as a plethora of other behaviors. And so the main reason why we sabotage ourselves is because, I guess what we should say is who we are essentially is we are a set of programs. And so we are either running software that is updated or it's outdated. And if we're running software that is outdated, it can form into these self-sabotaging behaviors. And I know that we've all experienced our own unique flavor of that.
Yeah.
I know I have. And yeah, so self-sabotage is essentially when we are running on these old default programs. And so a lot of the subconscious mindsets that have been installed or implemented have been formed in those early childhood, those formidable years between ages 0 and 7.
Mhm.
And though they worked for us back then, they're not so helpful as we become more mature, getting into adulthood. And so we're now unconsciously acting out in these and behaving in these outdated set programs that are no longer, I guess, pushing us towards our aspirations, our dreams, and our goals.
So it's not, you mentioned alcohol and substance abuse. Is this considered a mental illness?
Well, I mean, I guess it's up for, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's up for debate. In my personal opinion is that the subconscious mind is essentially, it's always constantly scanning and looking for repetitive content. So if we grew up in an environment that where we were using substances such as alcohol, for example, we're more likely to then use alcohol as we mature, as we get older, because we want familiarity. And so the subconscious mind can't differentiate between your thoughts, screen time, or real life. So it can't tell the difference between a joke, sarcasm, and a command. And so our minds are always operating like a computer, essentially. So it looks for commands and prompts and then delivers. And so the subconscious to me is like a 500-pound gorilla. It's truly your bodyguard. And so it looks and it scans the environment and looks for patterns or repetitions so that it can mimic in order to blend in and to belong in the greater tribe. And so if we're, again, acting from some of those old default programs that are outdated, we're going to find ourselves in those self-sabotaging situations.
Is that why some people, even though they know better and even though they know something is going to harm them or potentially ruin a relationship, is that why they'll engage in those behaviors or acts anyway?
Absolutely. it's like that old saying of like, we prefer the familiar hell than the unfamiliar heaven,
Yeah.
right? And so self-sabotage is associated with that. Um, and it's also the stories that we tell ourselves to ourselves about ourselves, right? So it's absolutely. And then we end up, fighting, and we end up arguing and holding on to those self-limiting beliefs, those self-sabotaging behaviors, because they're tied to our ego, which then we can say like, see, I always choose the person that always, does me wrong, or I always get myself into these relationships, because ultimately the ego wants to be right, because it always wants to affirm and confirm its own opinion of itself. And so if we're not acting from awareness and recognizing like some of these patterns, then we can constantly be in this cycle of um, of turmoil and trauma.
So it's like an excuse, a ready-made, stored excuse for engaging in acts like that, or making those excuses that I always run into this kind of person, or doesn't matter what I do, everything's gonna turn out crappy anyways.
It can be, right? Absolutely, because I think ultimately, again, it's familiar. So if we're growing up in an environment where mom and dad are abusive, or they're using substances, or they're smoking, or they're eating McDonald's, eating junk food, that's gonna be familiar for us. And so then therefore we're gonna be drawn to that familiarity. And as we grow up and become adults and get into relationships, we're going to mimic that environment that we grew up in. So we're gonna basically date a version of mom and dad.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it kind of sounds like you're creating a false reality, but is it really a false reality? Because, I mean, do you believe in whatever you believe in is your reality, and whatever I believe in is my reality? Do you see a truth in that?
Um, like as in like subjective truth versus objective truth in
Well,
that sense,
because
or
I mean, somebody who is like, for instance, gives into alcohol, it destroys their life, they lose their job, it tears their family apart, their relationships are just in chaos. They go to rehab, they come back, and if in rehab they didn't learn about limiting beliefs versus the ego versus these, why they were engaging in these self-sabotaging behaviors, they create this reality that they believe in and they will justify no matter what, but the rest of the world is like, what are you talking about? That is not how your life was. That is not what was happening. You made all of that up, but they believe it.
absolutely, a belief is stronger than any truth, right? Yeah, no, for sure. So, I work with stories as well. So it's really important that we become aware of the words that we're using. I have some background in acting, and so I'm familiar with the states that we can get ourselves into,
Yeah.
backstage or before the camera rolls. We would, as actors, we would put ourselves through such agony sometimes, getting ourselves into a state that would be congruent with the story that we're telling. And so we do that in life, right? We're constantly telling ourselves a monologue, and we're using words. And we have a tendency to believe that maybe words are descriptive, they describe our environment, our experiences. And though that is true, I think words are also they're creative. We really truly create the reality. So we create, like as you say, we create the belief system. And so if we can become conscious of those words that we're telling ourselves over and over again, and that story, we can we can start to look at whether or not that is actually truly fictional, or if it's actually factual. And I think for the most part, I think we realize that most of the time the stories are fictional. They may feel really real because emotions and feelings are real, right? And there's no such thing as a bad feeling or a bad emotion. From those feelings come behavior. As we're raising little ones and children of our own, we have to make sure that we teach them those tools, the necessary understanding of like, hey, it's the behavior. You can be angry, but just we have to make sure that you're not necessarily tearing the house apart. And
Mm-hmm.
so the story happened, the event happened rather, the trauma, the pain, that is valid and true. But we are constantly replaying that over and over again. And the story is what we made it mean about us. And if we are constantly playing that over and over again, we're going to put ourselves in situations where we're also going to look for the evidence to support that story, that self-limiting belief. So if we're looking for reasons to assure ourselves that we're right, that we're always constantly getting ourselves into crummy, toxic relationships, then we're going to manifest that. And so I guess, yeah, so the belief system is it's important because it is truly impactful. And so there is truth, and then there are what we believe.
Yeah, I know for me personally, after about a year and a half, maybe 2 years of counseling, I was finally able to identify that I was self-sabotaging in certain areas, not to the point where it was crippling, but there were certain areas of my life where I didn't even recognize those self-sabotaging behaviors until somebody else pointed it out to me. And initially I was like, oh, I am not. That's like such a icky, like self-sabotage. I would never do something like that to hurt or ruin a part of my life. But I was. And then to recognize and accept, we were able to start analyzing it so then I could rebuild from that. But it took a lot of repetition and practicing the pause so that when I'm in moments like that that represented those situations of the past, I didn't react the same way. So when you are working with somebody, is it a matter of teaching them how to recognize and react differently? And like, what does that process even look like?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you spoke on like a key word, which is repetition. And so again, the subconscious is always constantly scanning, looking for those patterns, those repetitions. And so if we can flood the system with new data, with new patterns that are not going to be necessarily triggered by those old outdated programs, then we're making progress, we're making strides. And so yeah, so what we do is we look at not only what has been implemented, some of those old, familiar, outdated programs, but we're also looking to what's more important is like what hasn't been said, what hasn't been conditioned in, what hasn't been programmed. And so yeah, and then the subconscious loves symbolism. And so
Mhm.
we do a whole almost like an opening ceremony because it loves the it loves nothing more than this symbolic of of gestures. So it's always constantly looking in the periphery. It doesn't look for necessarily what's in the foreground. And so we use wall art, we use forms of hypnosis, affirmations, and then I also incorporate human design as well into my our coaching as well, and and that always helps too because I mean basically human design is essentially it's a system of self-knowledge and following our own inner authority, and
Mhm.
what that looks like is basically the innate intelligence of the body and relegating the mind to be that of the observer rather than the leader.
Mhm.
And as we know, we can see, the mind is its genius is in its ability to decipher, um, to analyze, to look at situations, this versus that, scenarios, experiences, but it makes a crummy master. And so if we can relegate that to be the observer and not necessarily be led by the mind, we're more in alignment with our own inner authority, our own innate intelligence. And we can, look no further than, right now we're in an election season, so there's so much, manipulation going on, so much
Mhm.
mind control that's happening because folks are allowing their minds to be dictated and manipulated. And yeah.
So they're essentially waiting to be told what to do. So is that kind of where our minds are, as like we get stuck in these loops of replaying the same sad story, the pity party, fine, if nobody will join me, I'll just have it myself. And that's because they're essentially trapped in their mind. They're just imprisoned in their own misery, right? So that leads to the self-sabotaging behaviors. What would you classify as self-sabotage besides substance abuse?
Yeah, negative self-talk. It could be procrastination. It could be staying within some of those, keeping your like playing small, um, uh, and a bunch of other, basically like basically cutting yourself down before anyone else can. So whatever that looks like, in the sense of, believing those self-limiting beliefs. Um, yeah.
I've studied a lot of programs from a lot of treatment centers, mental health treatment centers across the country, several months, because somebody that was very close to me needed that kind of treatment. And I was looking for a more holistic approach. And, you know, it pretty much follows suit with the way the entire world rolls, that they don't look to actually help you heal your mind. They're looking for ways to identify what is wrong, how you were a bad person, what did you do to get to this point, and then it's almost programmed into their treatment program that relapse will happen, and when that does, this is what we're going to do. So it's their loop of keeping this continual cycle of patients or clients, whatever you want to call it. So the piece that is missing from, I would say, 9 out of 10 of these places is, how do we correct this self-sabotaging behavior? Because until you address this, none of the horse therapy or team building activities, none of that. Being clean and sober for, I got my 30-day, 60-day, 90-day pin, until you identify that and then positively rebuild yourself and replace those awful ways of thinking about yourself, how is it gonna work? It's almost asking, or just on hold, like pressing the hold button until you fall into the trap of just living like you used to, or acting on the way you used to feel about an old trauma. I mean, this could go down a completely different path, because I feel like the world has us mass conditioned to be suppressed, to be negative self talkers, and to constantly position us to be told what to do, but in no way that's going to positively benefit our lives, or to build character, or to be this open-minded thinker. So there's a lot to say about working with a mentor or a coach. You don't necessarily need one of those big treatment programs that you go away for 30, 60, 90, 6 months out of the year. Working to rebuild that mind is something you could do from home, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, like a society that's in fear is easier to be controlled. And so you can see that with like all the fear mongering. Um, absolutely. So it's a program. It's that is really truly installed constantly, and it's on repeat
So
over and
that's what
over
I was
again.
trying to say. That's
Yeah.
the comparison I was trying to make is
Yeah.
where the government or the whatever you want to call it,
Controllers. Sure.
controllers are fear mongering and mass conditioning us through hypnosis, whether everybody wants to believe it or not.
Yeah.
These treatment programs do the same thing because so many of them have relapse built into the program. So that's a fear that these people live with. They're living with the fear of relapsing. They don't have this positive foundation to stand on of, I've reprogrammed that. This is what I'm going to do when that happens, or this is how I respond when I'm presented with a situation like that, or when I think about that awful experience I had with somebody that I love, despite where it may have brought them to that point. We need to look at other routes, and this is something from what I believe that could be a first stop for somebody before they sign themselves away for 3 months in a program out of state.
Absolutely. I agree. I mean, I'm biased, of course, but yeah, no, I 100%. I believe so. And you mentioned something like you basically need to reprogram. You need to decondition. You need to, get out of like what we look at saying, for health wise diet. And so we have to be aware and vigilant of what we're ingesting, through media,
Yeah.
content, etc. And so, no, absolutely. It's imperative that we do that. And, and then I think it's also just understanding there's a priority. So I think if you get healthy, if you're feeding yourself good nutrition, good, natural, not processed food and junk,
No
that's going
chemical.
to also help get you to, it's going to get you, further to where you want to be. And then once you get your body healthy and operating and where your brain can actually function, your body can function, and then we can start to look at like, emotional, financial, spiritual. We can kind of get to those, but it's a process for sure. And it's also a self-love. I mean, not to get all woo-woo here, but I mean, I think, the act of someone coming to terms with the fact that they are looking that they need to have some guidance and help, and wherever that may be, we're going to meet them wherever they're at, and that's an act of self-love. It takes courage. It takes courage to be able to say, hey, you know what, this isn't working for me. Even though it's familiar for me, it's not producing the results that I want. And that can be scary. It's really daunting because we're pack animals. And so we're literally leaving the pack. And, instinctually that feels like either we're being abandoned or we're abandoning, and we're getting into, unfamiliar territory. And and but the great thing about that is that you'll then build new new tribes. You'll
Mhm.
build new connections, and you're going to become have new familiarity with the programs ultimately that you're upgrading. And yeah, I'm a proponent of, I think, Mark Passio. He's a great voice in natural law, but he coins this phrase of, where humans are not necessarily inherently evil, nor are they inherently angelic, but humans are inherently programmable. And I think that's definitely relevant to this conversation. And of course, a mentor of mine, Jason Christoff, who I'm certified under, a certified self-sabotage coach, and he runs a coaching program. And he's always talking about, it's about progress and not perfection. And so I think it's just, we're just looking to making those incremental changes. And, they've done studies with, graduates of SEAL teams, which is one of the most grueling physical exertions known to man. And the graduates who come out of that hell week, what they've learned is that they just keep their world small. They don't think about if it's Monday and they have to get all the way to Friday. They don't think like, oh my gosh, it's overwhelming. They're just thinking about, okay, it's Monday morning. They're waking up, whatever, 4 a.m. They just have to get to basically 5 a.m. And then from 5 a.m., they just have to get to breakfast, which is at whatever, 5:30. And then from 5:30, they just have to get to like 7. They just keeping it really small. And I think that's something that we can adopt and implement when we're on our own journey. It's just keeping those worlds small. We're not looking to get it all overwhelming, do it all in one day or all of that. So just keep your world small, and then also knowing that I think just the what is important for us. So whether or not you want to look at God or source or the universe or higher self or spirit, whatever you want to look at, your job as a human, as a sentient being, is just to make sure what. Just handle the whatever that is. The how, that's not up to you. How is God's job? Just just have that faith. And we always looking through like those like real challenges and those real challenging experiences. We always look back and we're like, man, I don't know how it happened, but it did. And there's some yeah, we can rest assured that it's going to get, you're going to get to where you want to be. It's just keeping it small.
So no matter where somebody is, even if they feel they're too far gone, is there still a chance to reprogram that?
Again, belief is stronger than any truth.
You have to believe you can. Yeah.
I think belief is really important. But yeah, if who was it? I forget who said this, but whether you believe you can or believe you can't, either way, you're right. And so it's I think it's that is the truth. So yeah, super important
And nobody can give that to you. That is something that has to come from within.
Yeah, and I think if you are keeping, again, keeping to this idea of keeping your world small, I think you have to do things each and every day that make you feel a certain way about yourself. So you do have to take some action. You have to look at the evidence and saying, oh, you know what? Okay, cool, Ryan. Like I made my bed today. Okay, awesome. I got out. If I'm in a funk, it's like, okay, well, wait a second. At least I'm getting outside. I'm getting sunshine. I'm making these incremental shifts and changes. And so you want to essentially do the things that you like each and every day that make you feel a certain way. So if you're constantly self-sabotaging and doing those old behaviors that ultimately are about avoidance and not in alignment with your higher purpose, then it's gonna be hard to have any other belief system there.
Mm-hmm.